Well, man, I am so honored to have my friend Neil. If you don't know Neil Greathouse, you need to. You should follow him online. He's got everything. Well, Neil, just tell us, like, who are you? What do you do? Where can we find you online? What do you do online? Because you're there in a lot of places, and you're one of my favorite people online. So talk to me about who Neil Greathouse is, and we'll get to why we're talking about you in a minute. But introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, you're probably going to talk about some of the inventions, and that's okay. But just listen, if you guys want, I mean, I don't want to start right out of the gate and say I founded Instagram.
No big deal.
I didn't. That's why I won't start off by saying that. No, my name's Neil. My wife Jean and I, we've got 3 kids. Been in full-time ministry for well over 25 years, and have started a church. Have worked at several different churches. I've worked at nonprofits in the diabetes space. I've made documentaries, short films, a bunch of videos and things like that. Been in the media and creative space for a long time. Right now, I'm working at a place called Simmons Bank in their digital marketing, and I am forced to wear a tie every day. And I just want you to know that when you get up in the morning and you're listening to this podcast, I'm wearing a tie right now so that you don't have to.
There you go.
But not on bank holidays, though. I just found out in my second week that we actually had a holiday, and I couldn't have been more excited. I was like, wait a minute, what? I don't have to go to work today?
Yeah. You used to have to work those days, and now you don't. That's great.
I did. Yes, I did.
That's great. I'll just right out of the gates, I'll tell you that Neil is one of my favorite people for a couple of reasons. He has an amazing podcast called Tyler and Neil, or Neil and Tyler Explain Everything.
Oh no, it's Tyler and Neil Explain Everything. And we did that because I didn't want to put my name first for fear that if the podcast failed, I didn't want my name to be the first thing you said.
Dude, there's no way.
To be Tyler and Neil.
There's no way. So you guys explain everything from eBay to what's coming out in Marvel this year.
Oh, careful.
And, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All that. It's great.
We started off as just like Tyler and I just love talking everything from pop culture to sports to, what's going on in the geopolitical climate. There's so many things we've talked about and explained. One of them is, so we've actually done some spiritual things. We've done some health things. We've done things that are personal. We've done projects that we both worked on. And we also, we have an episode coming up where we just talk about things we don't like, which is going to be riveting for a lot of people. But yeah, it's good. It's all
lima beans.
It's a lot of fun.
Number one.
Oh yeah, nobody likes those. Name one person that likes those besides your Mima.
I don't trust them. I'll tell you that.
No,
I don't trust them. Neil, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but the very first introduction I had to you was the devotional videos that you and Tyler put out. This is, I don't know, years ago. But you guys put these devotional videos out, and what's crazy is, and you guys are both, you and Tyler Tarver, and we'll talk with Tyler Tarver actually here pretty soon. And so you'll get to meet him. But you guys are like great friends, and you're both incredibly good at video and technology, but also like teaching God's word. And so these videos were like these online devotionals. And we're not talking 2020 yet. We're talking probably the 2017, 2018, 2019?
This was 2018.
Yeah. So I remember watching them, and I remember thinking, golly, I really like watching these. Maybe one day I'll get to make videos like that. And then a pandemic happened, and I was like, I've got, and so I stole everything that you guys did and how you did it. And there's times you look at my videos, and if they knew you, they're like, Mark, your videos are so great. Yeah, it's totally original. I didn't steal anything from Tyler and or Neil.
Yeah, if you steal from somebody who stole it, that's not. It's like two negatives make a positive.
Yeah, 2 wrongs make a right. So yes. Now my absolute, the thing that connects us in kind of a special way is that we have both planted churches in Columbus, Ohio, and we have both closed churches in Columbus, Ohio, and we can talk about that another time. But I say that to say, Neil, you've walked a lot of different paths, and as I've grown in my friendship with you, I've really learned to come to see how genuine you are, and how like the things that should matter in life matter to you, and you focus on those things. And so transitioning on to kind of why we're talking to you today is that I remember talking to you about how I was talking to my oldest, who's right now, as we're recording this, he's 11 years old. He's in 6th grade. And last October, he and I had our first conversation about sex. And let me tell you, it was just as good as you could imagine. It was not awkward at all. Yeah, except just the opposite. No, listen, as I've talked to people about it, no one really has a path. There's a couple best practices, but I remember talking to you because, I mean, how old are your kids?
Right now they're 21, 19, and 16.
Yeah. So you're kind of, you're past where I'm at. And this podcast
that was an incredibly good way of saying that. You're past where I'm at. Yes.
Seasoned. No, you have had, I'll never forget when I was talking to you, it was like, hey, I had this conversation. I sat down at a Mexican restaurant with my son, and we just kind of started hashing some things out. And what I told you is kind of what I learned is, this is not like one talk. And you said, no, it's not. And so you began to give me some pointers. And so I guess what I want to do is I want to share with people a little bit about your experience in that. By no means are you here because you've written a book on how to talk to your kids about sex.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm here to plug my new book.
Yeah. By the way. But I really appreciated what you said, and I'm trying to kind of learn a little bit from you and plug some of those strategies in. So my first question, how old were your kids when you started kind of having those conversations?
So you said your oldest is in 6th grade now,
grade.
Right?
Yep.
6th grade. That would be the youngest. So our oldest is my son, Roman, and he's 21 now. We had that conversation with him between 7th and 8th grade. Now, keep in mind, this is a few years ago. This is pre TikTok. But this is definitely, Instagram was out there and all of that. The ages varied for all of them. With the girls, as time went on, because there's a few years difference between the first two, and then 3 years difference between the last two, we had to up the time that we had the sex talk with them. And
like earlier,
it got earlier every year. So sure. I think right now so we did student ministry for about 15 years, my wife, Gina, and I. So we've been in the middle of student ministry for a long time. And you notice that not a lot of parents have a plan for actually having this talk with their kids.
Because you avoid it like the plague until it's in your face.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Until you absolutely have to, because you get nervous about it.
Were your kids ever in your student ministry? Sorry.
No.
Okay. All right,
no.
Go ahead.
And I'm actually, it's weird. I don't know if I'm thankful for that or not. When it came time to have this conversation with them, we had to do it at different ages for all of them. So Romans was a little bit older, but we also realized when we had that talk with him, he already had heard a lot of this, and we should have started sooner than
I said the same thing.
7th grade and going into 8th. It was too late. We should have started a lot sooner.
So give me some ideas, as much as you want to share, on maybe why you thought it was. I mean, it was just like, because he knew and he had heard, but like, was it difficult? Like, how did he respond? Was it difficult?
Yeah. So what we did is at the time, so my dad, he had the talk with me, and it was about 3 sentences total was the talk.
That's 3 more than I had.
He goes, yeah, I mean, it was like, and I had to ask, and he's like, like begrudging. He's like, come here. And we went upstairs to his bedroom, and he closed the door. He sat down on the bed, and he said a couple sentences, and he goes, okay. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. That about wraps it all up. It did the exact opposite of that. I mean, give me more questions. So what we decided to do is I started asking people questions who were in ministry or out of ministry that were years ahead of me that had done it, and started asking them, what are the mistakes you made? How did you do it? And I just had to piece together what our plan was going to be. So our plan was, we were going to take our kids away on a memorable at least an overnight. For the girls, it was 2 nights. For Roman and I, it was just 1 night. But we took them away somewhere special. So with Roman and I, a buddy of ours had a house over at the lake, and we went and spent 2 days, 1 night, and we got to use their jet ski, and we went and saw a movie, and we put things in between the day. So it wasn't like I was going to sit there across from the table with them and go, all right, here's a diagram. And I was definitely not going to do that. So what we did is we created some activities that had nothing to do with this talk to generate some moments of like some breathing room in between. Sure. And what we did is we just said, listen, and so Gina did this talk with the girls. I did not. Okay. But Gina and I talked about what we were going to talk about beforehand, because it's wild. You know, you take your son away, and then you do realize, like, my wife was like, when he comes back from this weekend, he's going to know all this stuff. I'm like, yeah. She's like, is it going to be awkward? I'm like, I'm going to do my best not to make it awkward, but here it is. And it wasn't for either of them, but it was really important that Gina wasn't there when I talked to Roman, and I wasn't there when Gina talked to the girls. I just felt like that was better.
Yeah. That's good.
A little bit easier. So we went away, and I started the whole weekend off. He knew what the weekend was. He was not surprised about it. And we went away, and I basically said, listen, Roman, my promise to you is this. I want you to always know more than any of your friends, because I'm always going to tell you the truth. What you're going to hear on the bus and in the locker room and at school and with your friends and all your buddies online, you're going to hear things that they have heard from another person that heard this, that another person heard that. And odds are they don't know the truth. So my promise to you is, I'll always tell you the truth. I'll tell you exactly what is going on, and you will know more than your friends. My only request is that you always come and talk to me about it. If you have a question, don't just go with whatever you think the status quo is or what somebody says. If you want to know, just ask me. And he's like, okay. Wow. And I said, okay, so here we go. Here's the weekend. And we just started. I explained everything, like, in detail.
Yeah.
We talked about purity, talked about his virginity, talked about, you know, your wedding night, talked about if you do have premarital sex. We talked about all of it. I mean, anything and everything. He over the 2 days, he became more open talking about it, but it was shock and awe. He was like, what? You do what? You know, and there's what? I was like, yeah, that, okay. And the girls reacted very differently. They all had different personalities. So one of them was like, okay, I get that. And the other one was like, oh, no. So it's just very different based off of personality.
Sure.
But what we also did is we went to, like, I took Roman to the store, and it's like, it was kind of like a field trip. We went over there to get candy before we went to the movies. And I said, all right, I'm going to point out to you every single thing in Walmart that is driven by the sex industry or feeding into what you as a young man are going to be enticed with. Everything from walking through this aisle, looking at these ads or looking at that ad, or here, even in the checkout line, which is where most of it is. Yep. I'm like, Roman, why do you think that is there? Why do you think that is there? Why do you think that magazine cover is there? Why do you think you need to be wearing that little amount of clothing to sell M&Ms? Like, none of this stuff makes any sense. But when you realize there's a sex appeal to it, that's what people are preying off of. So I would start asking the question, who do you think their target audience is? And that kind of opened up his eyes. He's like, oh, wow, okay, they're definitely targeting boys in this or girls in this or whatever. And so we just had really, really open dialogue. My mistake in it is that we didn't have, we did talk about it a lot more after that, but I didn't have predetermined times where we're going to come back together and talk more about it. I just did it as I left it up to him and me, and I would like, hey, man, how's this going, or how's that going, or whatever, and let's have a conversation. We had tons of them, but I didn't go, hey, here's what we're going to do. You can ask me anything, but in like a month, let's sit back down and talk about it again, because you're going to think more about it. So that would be my one thing, like my mistake or my regret or what we didn't do is like, hey, if I could go back and do it again, that's what I would do. I would say every month, let's schedule another one where we're going to sit down and talk about it.
I'm literally putting that on my notes right now to remember to do.
Yeah, it's like, so you can't cover everything in a weekend. They hit an overload.
For sure.
And they're like, okay, this is too much. I don't want to hear any more about it. And honestly, at that point, I don't want to talk more about it. So it was like both ways. But I think it could have been something where we said, all right, let's come back and talk more about it deliberately, not just based off whatever. And our kids would all do it. They would come home and say, hey, Dad, what is this? And I go, okay, let's sit down and talk about that. There were a couple times where they would literally say, like, we're eating dinner. And you go, hey, Dad, what is this? I'm like, okay, all right. So teaching moment here. We don't say that here, but let's go talk about that over here. Because there was it was so like, okay, you said I could talk about this stuff. I was like, yes, but like, that's just you and me, or that's just, you and mom.
Yeah. And everything. And I mean, gosh, I'm learning that even 11 years in, everything is continual, like education and continual guidance and continual, this goes here, not here, this conversation happens at home, not at church, not at school, not at the bus stop. That's good. Did you ever find that because you talked to Roman, Gina talked to your daughters, did you ever find that there was like daughters kind of in conversation with you, just thinking about parents with multiple kids? Was that something that you had to say, like, why don't you talk to mom about that? Was that something that came up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So there is that first time you see your kids after they know, and you're like, okay, is it going to be weird now or whatever? But then also they knew. Honestly, I'll be honest with you, there were times where they didn't want to talk to me.
Sure.
They wanted to go talk to mom or whatever. Sure. And honestly, even from both sides, there would be questions that the girls would have, and Gina would say, well, hey, ask your dad about that, because he's a guy, he'll be able to answer that better, and vice versa. So I don't think it's like completely off limits. Like only my wife can talk to only the girls. It's not like that, but there are some things I can't explain because I'm not a girl. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And they, so like Roman continued to like have conversations, is what you're saying. Like continue to ask questions. That's great. So, I mean, I guess the principle for me as I'm listening to you talk, and as I've obviously heard this before, is this idea that you paved a path for your kids to have this conversation with you. Now, granted, I mean, there's probably something to be said for your parenting leading up to that moment and what it was like. There's certainly a sense in which they felt safe for the first, 13 years or whatever it was.
Right.
And so but that path was paved. And I think that's the thing that took me by surprise. If there's anything that's counterintuitive, and I told you this, that I'm having to teach my kids more than I thought I was going to. And there's like there's not a day when you realize you have to unveil everything and say, well, now, here's this. So I'll give you an example that's like off the sex talk. In the sex talk, in fact, it wasn't like the sex talk. It was just the first of like kind of father-son for me. And so because he's new in middle school, is October. I was like, so what's middle school like? Are you ever like, because there's like fights in middle school, right? And it's like, yeah, there's like fights all the time. And I said, is there anyone that that gets in fights? He says, well, mostly it's the 7th and 8th graders. It's not the 6th graders. And I find that's true in most of the middle school situations. Mm-hmm. There was a video circulating around social media here, and I was able to see it and acquire it. And there was this fight that happened on a school bus, and I had heard, again, you've got a cell phone video, so everyone likes to react when they see the videos, 2 sides, 17 sides to everything.
Right.
But the story goes that there was a racially motivated fight based on some racially insensitive terms. And this boy got his clock cleaned and blood was flowing. And it occurred to me, I am actually going to have to teach my kids racial slurs so that they can identify them. And I never, ever, it's not intuitive in the least bit to me to think, yeah, you're going to have to help them identify these things. Now, if I ever catch those words coming out of my boy's mouth, he's going to catch the back of my hand.
Right. Yeah. He's going to his clock clean.
For legal purposes, I'm not going to do that. No. But seriously, that it's important to say these things, and there's never somewhere between they're riding a big wheel in the driveway and they're old enough to need to handle these things. And so I've heard stories of people doing kind of when they turn 13, we do this thing you've talked about. And when they turn 18 or when they're getting ready to graduate, there's kind of like a send off. But I really, really like the way that you've explained it, and just the fact that you've given that, I want you to talk to me. I will always tell you the truth. You're going to know more than your friends know. And obviously your motivations are good there. Now, we'll say on this podcast, every episode, no amount of good parenting guarantees that kids, never make a mistake in this area. So everyone that's listening right now has either got, someone that's young in their house hasn't had this conversation yet, or maybe someone that's older that the conversation's been had, mistakes have been made, and whatever the case is, there's always value in kind of shepherding your kids through that in honesty. And I think positioning yourself as I think what a parent should be, which is someone that's guiding their kids through every stage, as awkward as it is. So, Neil,
every kid is going to make mistakes. Every kid is going to make mistakes. That's why that scripture says, train up a child in the way they should go. It doesn't say they're always going to. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to show them the right way to go. But what we also realized is our kids are going to make mistakes. And what we wanted them to do is to always be willing to and want to talk to us about it, not for us to overreact when they do tell us a mistake. So the open dialogue communication is the most important. So I think it's Proverbs 14:17 in the Living Bible. It says reliable communication permits progress. And so we wanted to always have progress. What you said is right. The sex talk it doesn't end up just being the sex talk. It ends up opening the door to everything else that's out there. And we also realized this, so Roland and I we saw a movie. He was in junior high at the time. And PG-13 movies, they're allowed to say 2 F words. They're allowed to say 2 F bombs in there.
I did not know that.
And you're like, okay, well, that's whatever. And I remember we were watching a movie and it happened and I heard it and I was like, and I actually apologized to my son. I was like, man, I'm sorry, buddy. And I think at the time he was in 7th grade or maybe it was 8th grade. I said, I'm sorry. He goes, Dad, he said, this is actually the only time that I can sit down for 2.5 hours or 2 hours and only hear the F word once. And I was like, what? And what we started realizing is that he would tell us these words and things that they heard, that we didn't have a lot of words that they hadn't heard before, but they didn't know what they meant. All those words are thrown out there. They hear it at school. They hear it, with their friends or wherever. At a game, they're hanging out over at a friend's house, wherever, they hear those words. But the majority of the kids the students that are in that room don't know what those words mean, but they act like they do. So what our kids did is they would come home and they would say, hey, what is this? What is that? What is this? So it ended up being not just the sex talk, but it opened it up for all these other things. Like, what does this mean? Or tell me about this situation. So you're just trying to keep that open dialogue so that when they do become an adult and they're not living under your roof anymore, they're still coming back to you for advice, not just because you're going to tell them what to do. It's like, hey, now I'm just going to tell you, hey, here's what I would do in that scenario. That's up to you. You got to pray about it.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, Neil, what is there anything that you would share? Like, you're looking at a parent right now that has been avoiding this conversation, knows they're behind. Technology is winning, culture is winning, but they know they got to start somewhere. What would you say?
Well, Romans 12 is probably the go-to chapter on this one. I think it's a Message paraphrase. It says, take your everyday, ordinary life. You're walking around, you're going to work, you're eating, sleeping, waking up, life, and place it before God as an offering, because it's the best thing that we can do for him is offer our lives back to him. And I think it's teaching your kids. Okay. So let's say this, odds are they've already seen, I don't care what age your kids are.
Yeah.
They have seen more than what you think, or you even want to allow yourself to think they've seen.
Yeah.
They have heard it. They're exposed to it. So what you're doing is you're arming them with truth when they go into it. But then on the flip side of it, we as parents have to have grace with our kids and patience to not overreact when they tell us that they did something or made a mistake. Your kids are not going to get through it perfectly.
Sure.
But the goal is that we would shepherd them well through all of that, and that they would know when they hear us talking to them, it's not because we're this authority figure, but we're just trying to help them get through it, and maybe even get through it better than what we did, which I think that's every single person is like, oh gosh, I just don't want them to make this mistake, or I don't want them to do this. They're going to make mistakes, but watch your reaction. Yeah. We also gave our kids something. So our girls got something, and my son got something like a keepsake on that weekend away. Mm-hmm. Like my son got dog tags or whatever. It had a scripture that was on there that he always knew. It would, something that it's not like a promise ring or anything like that, but it was just like, hey, remember this is rooted in scripture. Mm-hmm. And then just keep that dialogue open. Like, we're not done having this talk. This is just the beginning of it.
That's good. That is so good. Well, man, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I've been so thankful for your friendship and just being able to lean in. And I know that this has been a blessing to several others. I would just say that if you're listening, this conversation is going to just be a continuing dialogue. We just had a sex series in our student ministry, and I realized that was the first conversation about sex for several of our middle schoolers, and just hearing from some of our parents. And some of the middle schoolers and the questions they asked, you're exactly right. They know the words, they don't know what they mean. Right. They're aware of kind of the idea around it, but there's a lot of mystery, and culture's done a really good job of discipling them. And so parents, just hang in there. And Neil, thank you for taking the time. Yeah. Seriously.
You're doing a good thing, man. This is going to be helpful. It's going to help a lot. First of all, for the students, but also for any parent or guardian that is taking care of kids. You're doing a good job, man. Proud of you.
Hey, ditto, man. Thanks a lot.